There was once a ruler with the name Arwa bint Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ja'far ibn Musa as-Sulayhi, often shortened into Arwa Al-Sulayhi. She was a long-ranging ruler of a sultanate in what is modern-day Yemen. Firstly, as the co-ruler of her first two husbands, and then as the sole ruler, from 1067 until her death in 1138. She was the last ruler of the Sulayhid dynasty, but she was also the first woman to ever be given the highly religiously important title of al-Hujja, the guidance or authority in the Ismaili branch of Shia Islam, signifying here as a living saint in the Ismaili tradition. She is referred to as as-Sayyida al-Hurra also, which means the free mistress or lady, a title or name which she shares with another later female ruler that ruled the city of Titwan in what is modern-day Morocco, but which you should not confuse with this queen. Arwa has an almost unique position in history and in Islamic history in particular, though there were more female monarchs in the international Muslim world throughout its history. Arwa and Asma bint Shihab, her mother-in-law, were some of the few female Muslim rulers in Arabic Islamic history to have had the khutbah, the Muslim sermon, initiated in their name officially. Historically, this was usually only done for caliphs or other very important male rulers. And Arwa Al-Sulayhi was one of the few Muslim women to ever wield both political and religious authority in her own right, though by far not the first one to do so, as for example during the time of the companions of Muhammad, you had Aisha bint Abu Bakr as a famous example of a woman wielding both religious and earthly power 4 centuries before Arwa. So although very rare in history, Arwa Al-Sulayhi is not completely unique in being a woman with great political and religious authority at the same time. Her time as a ruler can basically be divided into 5 periods. The first is the time from her marriage to al-Mukarram Ahmed in 1065 until the death of her mother-in-law, Asma, in 1074. Her mother-in-law actually more or less held all the power, and Arwa was in the background at this time. The second period begins after Asma's death, and Ahmed, the husband of Arwa, began to delegate all power to Arwa at that point until his death. Arwa is at this time not officially an independent ruler, but she is at the end more or less the de facto ruler of the realm, that she ruled in the name of her husband. She got this power and influence and authority through the fact that her husband al-Mukarram Ahmed was at first away on continuous military campaigns and later had become paralyzed, maybe from disease, maybe from injuries sustained in a battle against the Mujahids, another dynasty in Yemen, which they were constantly at odds with and fought against, leading to a long history of bloody conflict between them. And in this context of constant bloody conflict and her husband being paralyzed, Arwa could seize more and more power, or rather got delegated more and more power. During this period, the capital of the Sulayhid dynasty moves from Sana'a to Dhu Yibla, further south in Yemen, due to matters of both political instability and due to matters of military reasons, as Dhu Yibla would have become a better base of operations militarily and be more militarily secure than Sana'a would have been, as this period in the rule of Arwa Al-Sulayhi was a period that was marked by constant battles and wars against various outside enemies of the Sulayhid dynasty. And in 1075, Arwa commands personally troops against the Mujahids and their ruler, leading to a battle so enormous that it would be later described as the mother of all battles. A battle in which Arwa emerged victorious, and after which Arwa had the leader of the Mujahids decapitated and had the head of the Mujahids leader displayed directly under her room's window at the palace at Dhu Jibla, taking revenge against the Mujahids that had previously killed Ali, the father of her husband al-Mukarram and husband and cousin of Asma, her mother-in-law, to which she was very close to. Not to mention possibly being the ones that had paralyzed her husband in an earlier battle. Arwa Al-Sulayhi, taking more and more upon the responsibility of rulership and being victorious in various battles, began to get a reputation as a holy woman that treated people fairly and was a paragon of Ismaili Shia virtue, to the degree that she began to be mentioned in the sermons after the Fatimid caliphs and her husband. The Fatimid caliphs being mentioned because the Sulayhids were vassals to the Fatimid caliphate, though rather independent vassals. They still recognized the Fatimids as the true caliphal rulers of Islam, of the Islamic community, and the Sulayhids saw themselves as ruling in their stead in Yemen, with Arwa's husband being their official representative of rulership there, ruling on behalf of the Fatimids. Speaking about Arwa's husband, in 1084 he died, either due to the potential disease that had paralyzed him, eventually taking his life, or due to him getting sick from another disease, and thus dying from it. In any case, this marks the beginning of the third period of the rule of Arwa after al-Mukarram's death. Arwa wielded power as an independent queen for a while, or rather as an independent woman, as she still declared fealty to the Fatimids as an vassal subject queen under them. In any case, with the death of her husband and now her true independence, she received the title of as-Sayyida al-Hurra, the free noble woman, as she was now the true official ruler of the Sulayhid dynasty's domain. Though technically she wasn't to be a permanent ruler, as she was supposed to be a regency ruler for her son al-Mustansir for a while until he came of age. And her regency rulership was also contested, as it was claimed, and it is possible, that when al-Mukarram Ahmed died at At-Taqar in October 1084, he supposedly left a will stating that his cousin Sabah ibn Ahmed would succeed him until his son was old enough to take the reins of power. Arwa supposedly concealed the news of her husband's death and did not announce it until 2 years later, and wrote to the Fatimids to request the appointment of her 10-year-old son Abd al-Mustansir Ali as the official new Sulayhid ruler, but letting her rule in her son's stead for the duration until he was grown enough to take full rulership, avoiding that Sabah would get the power. And this contested claim of being the true regency ruler caused issues for Arwa, with certain factions within the Sulayhid dynasty going against her in support for Sabah. Yet she was not without allies, as according to Idris Imad ad-Din, the Fatimid caliph al-Mustansir issued a decree that raised Arwa to the rank of al-Hujja, the highest rank in the Ismaili hierarchy after the caliph himself in religious authority, the only woman to ever receive it up until that point. Al-Hujja being a model religious figure whose example should be followed by the Ismaili community as a guidance on how to live righteously. The support of the Fatimids and this newly given religious authority by them gave her increased political legitimacy that made it possible for her to politically outmaneuver her opposition and make her rulership more firm and stable for a little while. This would, however, not last, as soon she would be challenged again. This being the fourth period of Arwa's rulership, the rulership of Arwa with Sabah as-Sulayhi as an official co-ruler. as the Sulayhid family faction that supported Sabah managed to take control over a large part of the Sulayhid forces for a campaign against the Najahids and their new Zaydi allies. A new coalition of enemies that had risen in order to challenge the Sulayhids, and that the faction supporting Sabah had accused Arwa of having been too soft in dealing with, in having let them build up rather than having made a military campaign against them before it was too late. Sabah would thus be the leader of this campaign and not Arwa, and he tried thus to defeat this coalition, the key word being here tried, as Sabah was unsuccessful in his new task as a military leader, and his forces were defeated in 1086 by this new Najahid Zaydi coalition. And not long after this disastrous defeat at the hands of the Najahids, Arwa's fierce ally Amir ibn Sulaiman as-Sawahi rose in revolt against Sabah, maybe to try to seize power for himself, but with the official stated aim of removing Sabah and supporting Arwa and her rulership. The Sulayhids were now at the brink of a civil war, but the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir interfered and threatened to get involved personally with the Fatimid forces from the north if it escalated more, and Arwa once again managed through this interference take control of the situation, taking control of all the forces under the entirety of the Sulayhid dynasty, and managed to defeat the Najahid Zaydi coalition, something which her temporary military co-ruler Sabah had not managed to do, despite his rise to power as a temporary co-regency ruler, being built on the claim of being able to defeat the Najahid Zaydi coalition. Arwa, having defeated this coalition, discredited Sabah's claim to co-rulership and reduced his influence greatly, eliminating him as a threat to her rulership temporarily, but only temporarily, as around 1090 her son Abd al-Mustansir, the supposed heir that would replace al-Mukarram Ahmed and who Arwa was only a regency ruler for, died, making Sabah the one with the greatest claim of being the inheritor of the Sultanate of the Sulayhid dynasty, making him rise once again as a challenger to her rulership. And Sabah demanded to be made the full sultan at this point and proposed marriage to Arwa as a compromise, making her a subordinate ruler. However, Arwa rejected this proposal, which led to a standstill and a potential civil war once again in the Sulayhid dynasty. Yet the Fatimids once again interfered, and Arwa was ordered by the Caliph al-Mustansir to marry Sabah as-Sulayhi, although this marriage was never consummated, according to the sources. She was to marry Sabah for the legitimacy of being a true queen of the Sulayhids, and would be nominally a consort subordinate under Sabah, but in reality she would still be the more major of the rulers, as she would retain all of her previous freedoms, and she would still retain all of her previous authority from the time when she was an independent woman. And Sabah was forced to swear to not take any of her authority or infringe upon any of her rights as a ruler. So even if nominally and in theory she would be subordinate to Sabah as a married woman to Sabah, she would in practice and de facto be the real ruling power. A power that might even increase due to the marriage with Sabah, as marrying Sabah would placate the factions that had supported him against her, and thus increase her own legitimacy as a ruler. Arwa's marriage here was not done out of love or anything like that. It was done out of political expediency, due to political aims of placating both Sabah and the Sulayhid factions that had supported him, placating the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir, who had been commanding her to this marriage, and due to Sabah being now the heir to the throne after the death of her son, and thus marrying him would grant her greater legitimacy, and also avoid a civil war due to a succession crisis. And speaking about succession crises, the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir died in 1094 without a clear successor, leading to a conflict over the caliphate between the successors of al-Mustali and Nizar. And the mother of al-Mustali sent Arwa a letter calling for her aid against Nizar, seeking support for her son's rule. Arwa, realizing the strength of al-Mustali's political position and the likelihood of him winning, pragmatically chose to support him in his bid for taking over the Fatimid Caliphate in the succession, and supported him both with troops and with money. And with her aid, Mustali won against Nizar. But this succession crisis created the split between the Nizari and Mustali subsects of Ismaili Shia Islam. Also, notice that the call for aid was not sent to Arwa's husband, but to Arwa herself. It was obvious that Arwa was the one recognized as the true leader of the Sulayhids, as Arwa had more or less completely dominated the Sulayhids after her marriage to Sabah and after Sabah's humiliating defeat against the Najahids. Speaking about Sabah, he died in 1098 under mysterious circumstances, and Amir ibn Sulaiman as-Sawahi also died a year later. Arwa was thus freed of her two main political rivals, but also lost two people that had been supporters of her from time to time, and who she had also in part depended upon to rule. And thus begins her last period of rulership, of independent rule once again. This period begins with her position actually being a lot weaker than when she was a co-ruler in certain regards, due to the death of some of her chief supporters, and other clans and people once again taking chances to take power from her. Sabah and Amir ibn Sulaiman as-Sawahi, as mentioned, had died, but so had also a man with the name of Lamak ibn Malik, a religious Shia chief judge and missionary that had been a link between her and the Fatimids, and one of her main supporters. Furthermore, Arwa had lost a lot of good support in the schism between al-Mustali and Nizar, with her supporters either dying in various conflicts and engagements resulting from this schism, or opposing her support of Mustali, and thus turning their back on her due to her support for Mustali. Thus, this fifth period, during the earliest stages of it, was filled with uproars, civil wars and conflicts, which she had to put down. But she managed to hang on and restore much of what was lost during these various conflicts and rebellions. Though certain parts, such as the city of Sanaa, on the other hand, broke away for good. She also got into a conflict with the Fatimids, when the Fatimids sent al-Muwaffaq, a commander with an army, to her realm with the official declaration of aiding her against her enemies. But when he arrived, al-Muwaffaq tried to stage a coup against Arwa and replace her as leader of the Sulayhid dynasty. It is not known if this was the original plan made by the Wazir that sent al-Muwaffaq to the realm of the Sulayhid dynasty, or if it was a personal initiative taken by al-Muwaffaq, as he wanted to become his own ruler down in Yemen. Regardless of the various reasons and actors that could be behind this coup, this double-crossing was thwarted by Arwa, who defeated al-Muwaffaq and sent him back to Egypt in a humiliating display, though the ship did not reach Egypt as it sunk during a storm. Arwa might have intentionally sunk this ship, but she had supposed allies sailing on it too, who died when the ship sank, and the Red Sea is a rather dangerous sea. This is also why historically much of the trade in southern Arabia from the southern Arabian coast goes the land route after having been disembarked in southern Arabia, rather than go the way by the Red Sea to faster reach the north. Though trade on the Red Sea still happened, and many people did sail the Red Sea regularly in history too. So it wasn't impossible to sail, just very prone to accidents and to volatile weather. In any case, Arwa, having defeated the Fatimid army and their commander, did cause tensions with the Fatimids that Arwa eventually managed to bridge, as she needed their support. Either these tensions were breached due to the Fatimids' need of having the Sulayhids being loyal to them down in Yemen, or it was breached through one of the sides paying some sort of tribute to the other, or reparation. In any case, Arwa managed to secure continued Fatimid support even after this coup attempt. Support which she used to stabilize her realm. A realm that would now flourish due to her rulership now being stabilized, and she being the sole ruler. A ruler that would order the construction of great monuments, such as the Palace of Queen Arwa and the Arwa Mosque, which were constructed and laid their foundations during her time. And she also built a vast road network system throughout her kingdom in Yemen too. Speaking about the Arwa Mosque, Arwa died in 1138 at the age of 90 and was buried in the Arwa Mosque in a mausoleum that has to this day, despite even the civil war currently being waged in Yemen, been a location for pilgrims to visit. Remember, she is considered a saintly female ruler in Ismaili Shia Islam, and thus her tomb is visited as an act of piety and reverence for her. With Arwa's death, the Sulayhid dynasty effectively came to an end, as all her children had died before her, although some members of the Sulayhids held on to scattered fortresses in the decades after her death. They were relatively insignificant though, and quickly faded away as a power in southern Arabia. Her rulership started gradually by her taking more and more power from her husband, until she eventually became a true, strong ruler in her own right. After which she constantly had to defeat pretenders to the throne, outer threats, and various rebellions. But also, unlike another queen, Layla Aisha bint Ali ibn Rashid al-Alami, which I have made a video about, she does not seem to have been as tyrannical and led a far larger kingdom without having to resort to very extreme measures, like mass massacres and the like. Of course, she was obviously very good at leading troops and in war, but she also had a reputation of being a just ruler. So to the degree that she was declared a hujja and praised by large parts of the Shia population, and had support of large parts of her kingdom that supported her, despite her being a Shia and those parts being Sunni. And many of the people under her were Sunni Muslims rather than Ismaili Shia Muslims. The reason why she had so many rebellions though, I think is less about her rulership being bad or anything like that. Nor do I think that many of the pretenders were due to the fact that she was a woman and that they couldn't stand her being a woman ruling over them. Rather, I think the true problem lied in the structures of the Sulayhid dynasty, always having to rely upon various other groups with decentralized clan heads and chieftains, together with being Shia rulers over a Sunni Muslim majority population, was what really caused issues. As you had several groups within the Sulayhid dynasty acting independently, causing issues and taking opportunities to seize power, and or cause local conflicts that Arwa had to solve later. For example, there was a coup at the fortress of Jabal al-Dakar against the deputy governor, led by a group of Sunni jurists and backed by the Howlan tribe. The coup succeeded in taking control of the citadel, and as a response, Arwa marched in person at the head of an army. But she negotiated with the coup leaders and successfully brought Atakar back under her control, giving some concessions and giving guarantees that she would put a better governor over the entire region that would treat the Sunnis better there. Arwa was a skilled politician and negotiator that did not always have to resort to force, and knew when negotiations were better for long-term stability in order to hold together the very unstable, fractious and factionalistic coalition that was the Sulaihid dynasty's domain. But on the other hand, she was also very skilled at using force, as her various military victories throughout her reign showed, and also decisive in using it when it was necessary, defeating the Mujahids at several occasions, and defeating the various rebellions against her with force as well. She was a brilliant leader, and this is also why the Sulayhids collapsed after her, as her successors were simply not as skilled as she was at politics and warfare. They were not enough in order to be able to actually hold the Sulaihid dynasty domain together, with all of its various interests and sub-tribal clan groups always fighting each other and being always ready to strike at the centralized power at any sign of weakness. And thus the Sulaihid dynasty's domain splintered and collapsed. Such was the legacy of the domain that Arwa Al-Sulayhi had built. But she still left a legacy of being a great ruler, even if her realm after her did not survive. And she left a legacy of being an holy person in Ismaili traditions, despite being a woman. Actually, some people referred to her as a pious man in a woman's body. For example, the contemporary Hayat al-Mawalid, in which as-Sultan al-Khattab refers to her as a dhakar, male, in the body of a female, and states that her wisdom was such that she could not be compared to other lowly women, and should thus be considered a man for her greatness. A greatness that made Arwa Al-Sulayhi transcend the gender roles, transcend from being a woman into a man in the view of people around her, transcending into the role of being a saintly ruler. Arwa Al-Sulayhi shows the complexity of being a female ruler in the past, and also how gender roles could be transcended, and how great female personalities can leave legacies that will last for several centuries, almost 9 centuries, nearly a millennium, has the legacy of the great Ismaili Shia Holy Saint Queen, Arwa Al-Sulayhi, lasted. I hope you found the history about this queen interesting. If you have any questions, please post them and I will try to respond to them as quickly as possible. Also give a like. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.